and welcome. It is time for the Voice of Wrestling right here on voiceofwrestling.net, Fight TV, and ProWrestling.com. I am your host, Chris Cash, alongside Nick Paglino, Nicky Pags, and we've got a big show planned tonight, talking a lot of pro wrestling news. Of course, Saudi Arabia, Brock Lesnar is back. There's a ton of stuff going on, apparently, in pro wrestling. But before we get there, I want everybody to realize, if you go back and watch several weeks ago, a couple weeks ago, month ago, you'd notice I was starting to kind of look like Braun Strowman. And Nick, I swear to goodness, the Grizzly Adams beard is gone, as you can tell now. I shaved right before we came on. I want people to understand how dedicated I am to VOW. So when I sat down to do the show, I realized that apparently when I have this big black beard going on, it causes a glare from the camera. Like, it just looks really weird. And, and I can't fix it for some reason with camera and technology stuff. So I have to just simply do what you got to do. You got to shave. And now the glare is gone and it looks like a decent camera shot. But that's dedication, because honestly, you know, I mean, it's practically summer still. I know we're kind of into fall, but it's, you know, it's cold. I'm a cold-natured guy, and the beard keeps me warm. And
so you were into the beard.
I was.
But for the sake of VOW,
I shaved it all for our fans.
Yeah. And me, of course, I guess then would be the exact opposite.
You're looking rough over there, dude.
Well, you know, a lot of people don't know something interesting about this.
Like pubes hanging out of your hat.
This is a tattoo.
With the beard?
Yes. This is not, you know. So I actually, just
like
so
that laser surgery that women...
I am as professional as you are, and I take this show just as seriously as you are. I clean shaved too. I'm clean shaven right now.
Right.
I clean shaved about 10 minutes ago.
So that technique.
But this is a tattoo that I got for my 16th birthday when I was down in Cancun, you know, that's something that everybody does, you know.
You know, those women they have that technique you can do for like eyebrows.
Right.
Where you can, you know, if you don't have eyebrows, you can go tattoo eyebrows on. That's
Correct.
what you did for our show.
This is what I did for the show, was to have an actual beard tattooed.
I shaved
and also this hair that you were criticizing earlier, that's here. This is actually part of the hat.
Okay.
So, you know, like those mullet hats that they have,
right?
Where like this is the opposite of the mullet hat,
right?
Where it's all the front hair.
Yeah.
If I take this off right now, bald.
That's impressive. I would say we would take it to a vote, but I'm pretty sure you hands down win the dedication factor for VOW.
And I also don't know who would actually vote in that.
I would vote. I would vote for you.
Who would show up to the polling stations in order to cast their vote in that one?
So off of our hygiene and on to some wrestling, we're going to jump right into this week's main event. It's the main event on The Voice of Wrestling. Chris Cash, Nick Paglino, and Nick, we got to talk a little bit, not so much politics. We don't. Neither one of you or I want to get into the political side of this story, but we might not be able to help ourselves because it is something that people are talking about, and that obviously the cash grab side of WWE, you mentioned it when we were kind of discussing our show plans today earlier on, the capitalism of the WWE and what they are doing for money as it relates to Saudi Arabia, the fact that Brock Lesnar has now returned. Let's talk a little bit about the Super Showdown and what it really is even kind of leading up to, which will be the second big event. We had the Greatest Royal Rumble pay-per-view, and now we're about to have a second one headed to Saudi Arabia, and it looks like WWE is once again going to be pulling out all the stops for this show. And there's talk of obviously Shawn Michaels. Brock Lesnar has returned now for this big event coming up, a triple threat. We assume he'll probably also be very much involved most likely for the Saudi Arabia thing. And there's been some criticism, Nick. So let's first and foremost, I want you to just kind of give an update on Brock Lesnar, because I'm not sure that I think that took some people by surprise at Hell in a Cell. And of course, we'll talk a little Hell in a Cell later on today. But I want to just first and foremost give us a contract update with Brock Lesnar. Why is he back?
He's back for Saudi Arabia. So, this idea or this headline, of course, that came out of Sunday night, which is, Brock is back, the Beast is back. He is, but he's not back for good.
Sure.
So this is not a case of Brock Lesnar re-signing some long-term deal with WWE. This is not, so anybody who was hoping, Brock's back, this could lead into him returning and building all the way to WrestleMania. That's really not in the cards as of now. It's not to say that that couldn't happen in the future. The plan for Brock Lesnar to fight Daniel Cormier next year in UFC remains.
Sure. That
is happening. This is all about Saudi Arabia, and the show that we now know is called WWE Crown Jewels. Brock Lesnar, of course, will be challenging for the WWE Universal title in a triple threat match, which will include Braun Strowman and Roman Reigns. And as of now, he is back simply for that match. And again, this shows you, Brock Lesnar returning for this match shows you the amount of money that is being spent here by Saudi Arabia in this deal. It is absolutely massive. It's so big, that WWE is calling Brock on the phone and say, hey, you want to come back and do a match in Saudi Arabia? You already did one at the Greatest Royal Rumble. Hey, you want to come back and do a match at Saudi Arabia, and we'll pay you a truckload of money? And he says, absolutely. So much money is at play here that WWE is willing to contact Shawn Michaels, and Shawn Michaels is willing to agree to come out of retirement. This is a guy that we talked about, a couple weeks ago on the show, is someone who has really been the only steadfast retired pro wrestler. We've seen it with Ric Flair.
Right.
Of course, he came back. There's been countless other talents who have had their quote-unquote retirement matches in the past, only to come out of retirement and maybe wrestle one match, two match, maybe 200, 300 more matches. How many times has Terry Funk retired? Shawn Michaels is the guy that has stayed retired. But if everything goes according to the plan, Shawn Michaels will be coming out of retirement to team up with Triple H to take on The Undertaker and Kane at WWE Crown Jewels in Saudi Arabia. That is how much money is at play here, because these guys don't want to turn down these massive money offers.
Let's talk a little bit about the criticism. And I think, I understand where it comes from, Nick. I really do. I think that, from kind of humanitarian side of wrestling fans, us, you and I, both of us, we're not fans of WWE simply taking this for what it is, which is just a cash grab. But in the end, it is the $1 Million Man philosophy, in that everybody has a price. Because I think if that number is split in half, Nick, or a quarter of it, maybe we're not having this discussion. Maybe WWE rejects that if there is a number. And I think in the end, by the way, in the last year, Nick, record-breaking numbers. Record-breaking numbers as it relates to stock, as it relates to the network, probably sponsors and advertisers. I don't know those numbers, but I know WWE is making money hand over fist, and it's precisely for reasons just like Saudi Arabia. And I think wrestling fans seem to forget sometimes, conveniently, for some reason, I don't even know why, that WWE is obviously a business first. If you're Vince McMahon, Nick, or put ourselves in our own shoes, if Saudi Arabia loved the voice of wrestling so much that they would bring us over, I'd be there in a heartbeat, depending on the dollar amount, because it's what they have to do. WWE can utilize that money that they're taking and put it to good use in a lot of different ways. And I think as far as the women are concerned, women in pro wrestling, especially WWE at this point, have very little reason to complain, and I would doubt that most of them are. I can't imagine there's any rumblings of negativity as it relates to WWE doing these shows by the women, because A, it's not WWE's fault that Saudi Arabia is the way that it is, and B, WWE's women's revolution, Nick, without a question, has been lighting things up. I mean, they're going so far, and just around the corner here at the end of October, we're talking about Evolution and the all-women's pay-per-view, the first ever all-women's pay-per-view. So yes, while it's unfortunate that Saudi Arabia is so behind the rest of the world, and it's unfortunate that the women can't be a part of this. I'm sure WWE's making up for it. Now, by the way, Nick, I want to ask you if you've reported on this or if you know, is WWE compensating the women in some form or fashion differently or above and beyond? Because of the circumstances that they can't go get the payday that the men can get. Do you know if there's any type of compensation or making up for that fact as it relates to the women sitting at home, not being able to take a part of it? Is there anything like that going on?
Not as of now, not as it pertains to the upcoming Saudi Arabia show.
Did they do anything for the first
Crown
one?
Jewel event? Now, with the Greatest Royal Rumble, there were reports, that the women were paid, so to speak, to stay at home.
And they promoted it, right?
Because it would have been a time, where they were missing.
Right.
But I would have to guess, in the upcoming situation, they have the Women's Evolution pay-per-view, which is going to feature every woman on that roster. So no women will be left out of WWE Evolution, even if they make an appearance.
Sure.
So they'll all be paid for that, and I'm sure that's how WWE is going to compensate them for missing the Saudi Arabia event.
On the other side of the coin then, Nick, as far as some of the criticism that, let's talk a little bit about the Shawn Michaels thing. I think it's great that Shawn Michaels is going to come out of retirement, and I understand kind of putting him in a very safe environment in a tag match. Obviously, is what it's shaping up to be now. It seemed like I think Meltzer has all but confirmed, as you mentioned earlier when we were kind of doing our show planning, that match taking place. Shawn Michaels is going to get a very hefty payday for that as well. And so, of course, it makes sense for that to be the case on all fronts. Now, the question, though, that I have, Nick, is do you think that this is shaping up for him to kind of test his in-ring ability, his endurance, and things like that? Because I know that the interviews, and I know what he said, and I understand that. But if he gets in that ring and he does phenomenal by his own standards of whatever that is, and he feels good, then I think WrestleMania is all but certain at this point. Once you come out of retirement, retirement's done for at that point, in my mind. I don't think this is a one-off. If Shawn Michaels gets in the ring, he holds his own, he feels good based on his own critiquing of himself, I think that then the dream matches of AJ Styles or a Daniel Bryan for WrestleMania potentially looks a lot more promising. Do you think that's accurate, or do you think that Shawn Michaels is coming out one and done?
I don't necessarily know if he's coming out one and done, but I still think it's very premature to assume he could be having future matches against the likes of the AJ Styles, the Daniel Bryans, or some of the younger guys on the roster. To me, I think he would have to really feel absolutely positive that he could have a great match with those kinds of talents and really hold his own up against those kinds of talents if he's going to get in the ring with them, especially on a stage like WrestleMania, which, hey, maybe he's making more money to do Saudi Arabia than he is WrestleMania, but he's Mr. WrestleMania, and I'm sure to him that's still the bigger stage.
Sure, yeah.
I could definitely see him returning for future matches against people potentially his own age or some of the ring vets, maybe another singles match with maybe even a guy like a John Cena or a Randy Orton, who of course is, they're still younger than him, but he did work with them during his time. You know, the Ortons, the Cenas, the Triple H's, maybe a singles match against The Undertaker or Triple H or a Kane. I could possibly see that. You know, if I'm going to guess now, I would say, and I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago, and I think we kind of sort of agreed. I'm sure he's just looking at him physically. I'm sure he is in fine. I have no doubt that he's in fine shape to work with guys like Triple H, The Undertaker, Kane, those kinds of talents. Whether or not he can hold his own against the AJ Styles, the Daniel Bryans. I mean, hey, look, there aren't too many young guys that can hold their own with names like that. You know, they're just that good. I don't know. I think that remains to be seen, and I think it's way too premature to assume he might be able, you know, that HBK might be able to have matches with those guys.
The next wrestler we have on The Voice of Wrestling, we need to ask them. It seems backwards to me in a sense that it would be easier on him to work with an older guy his age than it would be to allow someone like an AJ Styles or Daniel Bryan to kind of protect him, shield his weaknesses at this point, and do most of the work in a match. It seems like Shawn Michaels would have to do more to make the most out of a match with someone like The Undertaker, who also struggles endurance-wise and just physically, and bones more brittle, and it really seems kind of contradicting to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
I don't know. To me,
I see what you're saying, and again, I don't ever like to speak
for a wrestler,
on behalf of the in-ring wrestling because I don't know it. But I mean, maybe the concern is, you know, AJ Styles, of course, is going to pull off all of his incredible fast-paced offense. Can Shawn Michaels compete with that? Can Shawn Michaels offer the same thing?
But he
doesn't. Are you going to watch
to.
a match between the two of them and think to yourself, I mean, hell, we know Shawn Michaels can sell. We know, obviously, he could sell for an AJ Styles, for a Daniel Bryan. But where would he be offensively? Would you tend to look at it as a bit of a one-sided match because AJ Styles is sort of pulling off all the heavy artillery and Shawn Michaels isn't? That might be my only guess, and it's just a guess as to the reason why Shawn Michaels might not want to get in there with an AJ Styles or a Daniel Bryan, because of the speed and the technical ability that they have at their age. Maybe Shawn Michaels just isn't there, so he doesn't want to feel like he's being outmatched when you're watching it and you're saying, my God, you know, Styles is hitting him with everything he's got, and Shawn Michaels can't really do that because he doesn't have as much.
Yes, I understand that. I don't know that fans are going to look at it that way, and I think there's still so much Shawn Michaels can do. I know Shawn Michaels better than Shawn Michaels knows Shawn Michaels, and I think he can do it. So I vote yay. Maybe we will get to see that. I really do think, though, this match, the tag match, is probably kind of a trial run for Shawn. And I think WrestleMania being right around the corner would be probably the second place we get to see a match with him if it happens. And it makes more sense that way. Look, I really, really, if I were betting money, I bet we see at least one dream match between Shawn. Maybe not. Maybe I'm completely off base, and I would tend to believe Shawn Michaels when he says this is kind of the reasons behind why he would not want to do a match with someone like Daniel Bryan or an AJ Styles. But I just think that if he gets out there, feels really good about himself, it becomes more probable, but we can speculate and talk about that more as we get there. So I think, though, in the end, Nick, Saudi Arabia is what it is. It's a business transaction. It's a very lucrative one for WWE, and I think they've gone well and above and beyond. The fans shouldn't be bitching because they're getting a good show. I think it's going to be an interesting show. It's going to be a lot of fun kind of vintage stuff, obviously, with the tag match, The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, etc. And then, of course, we still do get some storyline progressions in the matches that they've set up, obviously. And we will talk a little bit later on as we kind of get into some other things. We'll talk about the idea that I think a big title change takes place at that show. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But we want to know what you guys think, so leave a comment wherever you're watching this. YouTube, of course, Fight TV. Let us know what you think in the comment section, and let us know if you agree. What do you think of the Saudi Arabia show? That's been the main event here on The Voice of Wrestling. We're back. The Voice of Wrestling, Chris Cash, Nick Paglino. And Nick, let's talk a little bit about Hell in a Cell and what we thought of it. Of course, let's start off with the finish. I mean, that was kind of our secondary main event for this week anyway, and the fact that it's been a while, Nick, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, or if you know of another time. It's been a while that I remember fans in attendance of a pay-per-view or an event like this booing as loudly as they were at the finish. It started off with them chanting, "This is awesome," I think, at one point when everybody was on top of the cage and everything was going on. And then, of course, by the end of it, it was, "This is bullshit," or something along those lines. So, Nick, let's just start off just kind of open discussion on what you actually thought of the finish itself.
Again, it was a good match. I think it was the match everybody expected that Roman Reigns and Braun Strowman were going to have. Very physical Hell in a Cell match. And again, I think that, it depends on the kind of audience member you are. As I'm sitting there and I'm seeing Brock Lesnar coming back, I'm thinking to myself, Saudi Arabia is on the horizon. I have my views of, and I know, of course, we already talked about that a little bit in the main event, but, it's like you said, you can look at this in one of two ways. The business mind will tell you, of course, WWE goes to Saudi Arabia. This is worth a truckload of money. The human side of someone,
right,
especially someone like me, is going to say, I would never want to do a show in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
But this is a win-win situation for WWE. Let's not give WWE too much credit here. Let's call it like it is. WWE is not going to affect change in Saudi Arabia. Women are not going to suddenly start having equal rights. People are not going to be treated humanely in that country just because WWE ran a pay-per-view there. But if change does start to happen in Saudi Arabia, and little by little it is starting to happen very, very gradually, WWE can jump on that train. And they can say, hey, see, we were there when this country was making changes and we helped make changes. So they can take credit for it if it happens. And if it doesn't happen, they can say, well, we're Americans. It's not our job to change things. It's not why we're there. It's our job to come in, give a great show. And if we can introduce some of those changes, if we can influence them a little bit with our westernized beliefs, then great. Then we've done that. Then we've succeeded. And, if in 5 years, if women are allowed to go to these shows at Saudi Arabia and compete at these shows, or even if women's laws start to loosen up in that country, WWE can take credit for it. They can say, hey, look, we helped this. So It's kind of a win-win for WWE on both sides of the coin. I don't like seeing all the propaganda that we're seeing, which is WWE sort of putting the country over as this wonderful place to live. This, we remember talking about it a little bit with the Greatest Royal Rumble, where, they were purposely had the law there, the rule there was that if you were a married man, you had to bring your wife to the show. If you bought tickets, if you had children, you had to bring them because they wanted to portray it. And they sat all the families on the hard camera side because they wanted to portray this as a look, this is a family oriented country where women and men sit together and watch these shows in peace and harmony. And that's not the case at all. That's all propaganda. So to see WWE selling out to that kind of propaganda really, really does bother me. So again, I feel like I had to say that because that's part of how I react to when I see Brock Lesnar make his return at Hell in a Cell. And here he is, and he's coming in, and now we get the announcement on Raw this week, that Of course, there's going to be this giant main event at Saudi Arabia. So what did I think of the finish? To me, I saw these two guys telling a great story, and then I thought to myself, here we go again. Bringing Brock Lesnar. We thought this was over. We talked about this heading into SummerSlam. You and I think, both agreed it was time for Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar to retire. And I think that's probably the reason why Braun Strowman's promo on Raw this week was met with such a great response. When he very simply said, this sucks. Brock Lesnar sucks. Roman Reigns sucks. And I think he sort of was voicing this general opinion that people had, which is, we're done with this. Sure. We don't want to see this anymore. Right. But here it is. And it isn't going to lead us into a different direction. It's going to lead us sort of down that same path so that Brock Lesnar can get one more big payday out of the Saudi Arabia show. So as it stands on its own, the finish was, it was fine. It didn't really bother me that much. But knowing how this all sort of plays out and where this is going to go, and I don't think either one of us predicts Brock Lesnar is going to win that match in Saudi Arabia. I would have preferred to see Brock Lesnar sit at home for several more months at the very least, because I just don't think it's time for him to come back yet.
And I tend to disagree, only for the purpose of the way that I saw this going originally, or at least what I was hoping to happen, and what it seemed like maybe was going to be kind of the case for Braun Strowman was his promo, I think, this week on Raw said something along the lines of, now I've got to take care of Brock Lesnar, and then I'm going to take care of Roman Reigns. To me, that would have been a perfect way to go, was allowing Brock and Braun to go one-on-one, and Brock at this point, with the title off of him, he's really not in that picture anymore, even though he is, as just kind of fodder and bait for someone like Roman or someone like Braun. It made sense to give Braun a meaningful match, which again buys more time, because if there's one thing that's clear right now, Nick, it's that they are, without a question, WWE is trying to protect Braun at all cost right now. I mean, and they're doing a pretty remarkable job of it, in my opinion. And I think Brock coming out, it seemed like it was setting that up. I was really taken aback when they announced the triple threat. I thought that was a bad move. It's like give Roman maybe somebody else to beat up on, while Brock and Braun kind of take up a little bit more time, and then of course bring Braun back into the picture and back into the fold when you're ready maybe to make that switch, which I don't know if Braun's ever going to take the title off of Roman, but it does seem like that's the possible route, with as much as they're trying to protect him right now. But I really thought that was the direction they were going. And so as relates to the finish, I had no problem with the finish. I thought Brock looked great. I thought the broken door incident was pretty cool. Walking up the door into the ring was cool. Like, I thought that was good. And then I guess my question to the fans that were shitting on it ultimately, and Nick, my question to you would be, if this happened, the false finish, obviously, I think people are bitching because it's Roman, because it's Brock, and at all costs, WWE is going to try and protect Roman Reigns, not only just individually, but as a baby face, which is what a lot of fans are bitching about. If this would have happened in any other story at this point, a Samoa Joe and AJ Styles, which the fans are obviously very, very high on, do they bitch as much as they did, obviously, against, with the way that it was for it being Braun and Roman? Like, my question is, if this happened, if this exact storyline played out in the main event of a Hell in a Cell pay-per-view, but instead of it being Roman and instead of it being Braun, it was AJ Styles and Samoa Joe. They wanted to prolong the story. They wanted to give a false finish and protect both guys, which they've had that, by the way. Did people bitch as much about AJ Styles and Samoa Joe's false finish from the last pay-per-view, from SummerSlam or whatever it was, when they beat each other to a pulp and it just was a no contest or whatever? They ended it. Did people bitch as much as they are now?
I mean, I don't think they bitched so much specifically about that as they did. They bitched more in general about the fact that there were a lot of false finishes that night.
Well, yeah, right.
And so they were kind of hoping, I think maybe in the overall flow of the pay-per-view, they weren't as happy with it.
Right. Well, and again, nobody expected at this point for Braun to win the title. Nobody expected him to take a clean loss. So what do you do? I mean, you got a kind of a surprise Brock return. I don't think anybody saw that really coming unless it leaked somehow, but I didn't see that. So I think, again, the finish was what it was. It's WWE, it's storyline driven, and it protects both guys. Now, I would have rather them gone in a different direction. I'm not really as high on the triple threat for the reasons I mentioned. But we'll see where it plays out. And I agree, Brock's not going to win that match. I think he actually takes the loss. Again, another way to kind of protect a Braun and a Roman. But I think if you're really trying to keep Braun Strowman as high as it seems like and as protected as it seems like you are, to me, this would have been a great opportunity to give him a clean win over Brock Lesnar, which I think he could have used a little bit more. Not that he's not as hot as ever right now. But I guess, Nick, my question then now to kind of switch it over is, do you predict, and if you do win, Braun Strowman will take the title from Roman? Is that in the cards in your mind? And when do you think that realistically WWE will feel good about it going down? Like, I'm not sure that I'm convinced it's going to happen, but what do you think? Do you think that, how does this play out ultimately?
Well, the interesting thing is that we're getting into a time right now where there's not a whole heck of a lot left we have to get through. True. Really, when you look at it, it's shocking in so many different ways for a number of different reasons. But there's not a whole hell of a lot we have to get to before we get to WrestleMania 35.
Yeah.
You get yourself past this Saudi Arabia show, which of course is happening in November. Then you have Survivor Series, and there's a very easy thing, you can do there, of course, with the factions. You can do Strowman teaming up with the Dogs of War, taking on the Shield, a couple other guys. You could do the traditional Survivor Series elimination match. So that takes care of that. At WWE TLC, again, if they want to go with Strowman versus a Roman Reigns main event, you can do it in the confines of a TLC match, which then, of course, can end in some kind of mayhem, and you don't really have a winner there. Then you get yourself through to the Royal Rumble, and Braun Strowman can be the Royal Rumble winner.
Sure. Yeah.
And now he heads right into WrestleMania. So really, there isn't that much more pay-per-view time that WWE has to book themselves through before you get to WrestleMania 35. Honestly, you're going to have them win the title at Survivor Series. I don't see that. I don't see it really happening
if it happens,
Royal Rumble. I think the fans would love a Braun Strowman Royal Rumble win, even though, it depends. It depends on the kind of momentum he has at that point. He already won the greatest Royal Rumble. Maybe fans aren't going to want to see him then win the Royal Rumble again, sort of a back-to-back Royal Rumble win. But hey, with WWE, if they're pushing a guy, they'll stop at nothing. I could definitely see him winning the Royal Rumble match next year. And then you've got the built-in main event there of WrestleMania, which is finally Strowman versus Reigns and Strowman getting that title win.
So you don't think ultimately it will happen before Mania, if it does?
I just don't see why it really has to. No, I don't see it taking place. Hey, if it's going to happen somewhere, would WWE want to pull that trigger at an event like Saudi Arabia? Right. Because here's the deal. You've kind of got to, I don't know if you necessarily have to up the ante now. We saw the greatest Royal Rumble match, 50 men in a Royal Rumble match. What are you going to do to top that?
Right.
And there were no title changes at the Saudi Arabia show. So, and a lot of people sort of in that sense, they kind of compared it to a glorified house show with that big Royal Rumble match. But what are you sort of going to do to top that show? Maybe you do see a title change. Maybe something does happen there where, and again, to your point, and I think I definitely agree with you that Brock Lesnar will be the one that takes the fall in that match. Braun Strowman could defeat Brock Lesnar. and he wins the title, and that sets up then that natural storyline progression, which is Roman Reigns saying, well, I never lost. I never lost the title. I wasn't pinned. I didn't submit. And you kind of seeg back into that singles feud between Roman Reigns and Braun Strowman. The question then becomes, how is the audience going to take to Roman Reigns? Because isn't it funny? We just talked about this a couple weeks ago. Roman Reigns looked like he was making some headway there with the audience.
Yeah.
And then Hell in a Cell happens.
Yep.
And the fans shit all over that finish and that, maybe not the match, but the finish. Mm-hmm. And he came out on Raw this week, and it was just right back to being what you would think is the top heel in that company.
And I think, look, that'll be very, very common. It's going to be a common occurrence that even if they gain a little momentum, because of the Shield reunion and them playing off on him, it's just,
and then just depending on what city they're in.
Absolutely, it's going to be up and down. They're never going to get over that. Plus, they just don't book him good enough character-wise to ever win over the fans. And I just feel like that's an uphill battle. They're going to constantly be trekking. And so I think they just need to get over that. If they're not going to turn him heel, just understand he's going to be up and down so much. And I think, I think they understand that, I really do. And so moving though, and when you talk, I really don't see the triple threat having a title change. And I'm with you. I think it makes a lot of sense because of the investment that they've put into Roman Reigns, and I think they just like him with that title over his shoulder. I think he probably heads into Mania as the title holder and maybe wins there. It just kind of depends on how long they play this Braun Strowman story out. And because of the Shield's involvement and Dolph Ziggler and Drew McIntyre's involvement, they've got a ton of legs. And so I feel like this does play out over a series of events, a series of months, and just as you mentioned, but really they have a lot of outs. I mean, they have a lot of ways to protect Roman, protect Braun with the events that are coming up, and then you're right around the corner into to Royal Rumble, shaping up obviously WrestleMania, which then probably is kind of what they're building toward for Braun and Roman. And I think that there's a lot of ways they can skate by, so to speak, and still keep it entertaining if they do a good enough job creatively to get there. But the title change that I mentioned and alluded to earlier, and I feel like probably goes down at this next event, and probably one of my favorite stories, if not my favorite story right now on WWE television, is Samoa Joe and AJ Styles. I think Samoa Joe is ripe and ready for a title run. I think the fans are invested and interested in a title run, and I absolutely would put my money now on Samoa Joe finally beating AJ Styles. They've done a really good job of getting both guys over and keeping them strong in the story as it's progressed over several events now, and of course a couple of months. I feel like the time is right, and because I don't think that we just saw the SmackDown Women's title change hands that we'll talk about here in a little bit. And I don't think that we're in due for Ronda losing her title. I don't think Roman's losing his title. I think at this point, to kind of bookend a little bit what's going to ultimately be a massive show, at least in WWE's eyes, for Saudi Arabia coming up after that, I feel like right now, where I also just think that the kind of glorified house show part of it, Nick, is probably what they're considering Saudi Arabia 2.0. So I feel like that's not going to see a lot of title changes, or maybe some lower card stuff, because you've got some massive headlining of matches that's going to take place there. I think that the Super Showdown is kind of the next best spot for a title change on the SmackDown main event side of things, and I really think that Samoa Joe is due that big push, and I think that it's happening sooner rather than later. Your thoughts?
Without a doubt. I mean, the time, like you said, I think the best word is ripe. I mean, this is a guy who, and you could say the same thing probably about AJ Styles. These guys don't have 15, 20 years left in them. They're not rookies.
Sure.
So if you're going to pull the trigger on title runs for these guys, now is the time. AJ Styles has pretty much broken every SmackDown record there is as far as WWE title holders is concerned. And so, I think it's just time. It feels like the right time for him to drop the title, and it just feels like the right time for Samoa Joe to win. I'll tell you, I wouldn't even mind the storyline continuing, for a match, maybe even 2 matches beyond Samoa Joe winning. Obviously, if Samoa Joe wins, AJ Styles will get that title rematch, but I wouldn't mind seeing maybe even another match, cap the whole thing off before Samoa Joe can really get in and start having maybe some great title defense feuds against the guys like the Shinsuke Nakamura's and the Jeff Hardys and the Randy Ortons. If you're going to pull the trigger on a title change, it's just in a few weeks, Super Showdown. The time feels right, and you saw Becky Lynch, who, and I know we want to talk a lot about that too. We saw Becky Lynch win the title, so I don't think the time would be right for the title to change hands there. And really any other title change other than perhaps Seth Rollins losing the IC title, they're really not, the New Day. Does it really matter?
No.
The Raw tag titles, does it really matter there? Those are sort of the minor titles that still don't, as far as when you talk about, a big title change, I wouldn't really put those in that discussion. So the big title change that could happen is the WWE title change, and I think Super Showdown is the perfect time for that to happen.
Hey, let's talk about it since you brought it up. Congratulations to Becky Lynch, not just because she won the title, but because I think she created that moment herself, in a sense that her promos were so good. The turn was done so well, by the way. I thought it was amazing. I thought they did a miraculous job of putting her in a situation where she could succeed. And then, of course, she took it and ran from there. One of the best and I normally don't like, Nick, the promos where you've got the commentators at the table and you've got the guys backstage trying to converse and stuff. There's a lot of awkward pauses a lot of times. I don't like those promos, but Charlotte Flair and Becky Lynch, that promo with the side-by-sides of the two of them was so damn good. And the case of WWE, and we talked about this kind of in our pre-show planning, Nick, about how fans just don't feel, as it relates to a guy like a Roman Reigns, a guy like Braun Strowman, and kind of the way they go there. Even Daniel Bryan from way back in the day, and why Batista didn't get over, in the end when he returned and came back and kind of took that spot, and people were pissed, and Daniel Bryan kind of created that situation for himself. Becky Lynch has done this for herself. I do not think, Nick, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, I don't think it was in the cards for Charlotte Flair to lose that title this quickly. I don't think there's any chance in hell they viewed this as anything more than a transitional, title match or two program in essence for Charlotte Flair. I feel like Charlotte Flair and Ronda Rousey probably was booked, and as soon as it's been a long time coming, I think, for WrestleMania. I think Charlotte Flair winning the title back probably was due to the fact that they want her most likely as a champion, and maybe even Ronda as a champion until WrestleMania, where they can kind of clash. Maybe that's not even. Maybe they're scrapping those plans altogether, or writing this thing out and seeing where it goes. But Becky Lynch winning, I do not think was in the cards as of a month ago. Do you think that? I mean, honestly, do you agree with that? Do you think this is kind of an impromptu title change? Because I really don't think that they had this planned from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, the title change might have been in the cards at some point, but I don't think it was probably as soon as Hell in a Cell.
Sure.
This was a pretty immediate turnaround. Maybe there were plans to do this at Evolution. Neither of them have a match yet announced for that pay-per-view, so maybe that was when they were going to pull the trigger. It could have happened maybe at a Survivor Series or the December pay-per-view. But see, this is just such and it's funny because people keep throwing the word organic around. And I think when people use that word, sometimes they don't stop and think, what does that mean? Organic is something that happens to me and when you're relating it to pro wrestling, it happens out of necessity. It happens because that is the way it feels like it should go. And the driving force behind an organic storyline to me is the fans. It's the crowd response. It's putting the talents out there and letting them do what WWE wants them to do, then taking a step back and saying, all right, how did the fans react to that? Look at what they're doing with Roman Reigns. I mean, the fans are taking everything WWE is offering them through Roman Reigns and throwing it right back at them and saying, we don't really want this, and they didn't want what they saw at SummerSlam with Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair. So WWE adapted. They didn't cave. They didn't say, okay, well, oh man, the crowd's panicking here. They don't like this. So, okay, we're just going to do everything completely differently now. And we're going to make Becky Lynch a babyface. No, they were malleable. They amended the direction a little bit and said, okay, if we're going to have Charlotte Flair, the plans were for Charlotte Flair to be the staunch babyface and Becky Lynch to be the staunch heel. Let's muddy the waters a little bit. Let's have them both sort of argue a case as to why, because that's what I've taken out of this storyline, Chris, is that both of them, when they're cutting their promos, I agree with them.
Right.
I hear what Charlotte has to say, and I say, that's a great point. She makes a great point. Then I hear Becky, and I say, yeah, she makes a great point too. And she's not just she's not just getting on the microphone and, doing what Braun Strowman had to do on Raw this week, which is say, oh, and by the way, the fans, you all suck too,
right.
Because that's the way you really go heel, right? So she's coming out. She's making logical arguments that the audience is understanding, and she's appealing to she's playing. This is what it's doing. It's playing to the audience's intelligence and not their stupidity.
Sure.
It's making me as an audience member react and say, yeah, that's right. This is good. She's making a point. Becky Lynch is making a point. I agree with what they're saying. Oh, that was a sneak attack, but I guess I get why she's doing it. They're pissed off at each other. I want to see these two fight because I want to see who's going to get the better of each other. It's a storyline that is playing to my intelligence and not my stupidity. Because I think one of the problems that, look, we didn't know where this was going to go. We still really don't know where this is going to go. But we just finished talking about Braun Strowman and Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns, and I think both of us have a 100% complete idea as to where this is going to go. And this is not going to end up with Brock Lesnar winning the Universal title at the Saudi Arabia event. So that's playing to what we know is pretty much going to happen. We knew Roman Reigns was going to win at SummerSlam. We all knew Roman Reigns was going to win so much that look at what they had to do to book that match in order to get the fans to not completely reject the whole thing.
Right.
And they had to make sure that they got off the air right after he won the title. They don't have to do that in Becky Lynch versus Charlotte Flair because they've actually listened to the fans. And, I want to be very careful when I say that. It's probably why I've been explaining this so much because, I don't like this idea of, well, if a fan says they want this, give it to them. Well, no, you don't do that. No show writer, no showrunner is going to, they don't go out on the street. Game of Thrones season 1 doesn't end and they all go out in the streets and say, okay, everyone tell us what you want to happen in season 2 and we'll write all that. No, they have a trajectory. They know where they're going. But things happen. Audiences respond to certain characters, so they adjust. Sure. They say, okay, we're going to stay on this we have an arc. We know that there's this beginning and this middle and this end that we have in place. And we know we definitely want to get there, but we may make tweaks to how we get there. And that will warm up the audience a little bit more to what we're giving them. And I think that's what we're seeing in Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair. And it's so far, I think it's just been fantastic.
It's all, it's as you mentioned, I think the adaptation that they've done for everything with this. And then it's just, it really is. These girls are making it believable. And let's give some credit as well, not just to Becky Lynch, but to Charlotte Flair for her part in it. Yeah. Because I think both of these women are without a question at the peak of their talents, and they are making the most of this and have bought themselves more time. And again, I think, like you mentioned, it could have been in the cards for Becky Lynch at some point. I really don't know if it was going to happen this time around, though. Maybe eventually. I really just think she bought herself a title run as well. I mean, it really feels that way to me because it did seem kind of quick, obviously, with Charlotte Flair just having won the title in the first place. So I'm not sure that it was in the cards for her to win this early on. And well done. It was great. The fans are buying it hook, line, and sinker. And look, what they are doing, and we can kind of start changing because there's a few other things we want to mention before we get out of here and talk about maybe. To me, without a question at this point, not because I think what Ronda is doing on the Raw side isn't good, and I think Alexa Bliss is a big part of that, and I think what she's done is phenomenal. I thought this week on Raw was actually really, really good with the open challenge and Natty getting knocked out. But Becky Lynch, and my final point, Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair are hands down the best women's angle going on in WWE right now. Like, it's not even close to me. And I've got high praise for Ronda Rousey and what she's doing as well, Nick. But I think without a question, Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair are the women to be watching in WWE. And so, but speaking of, though, I do want to give some credit to WWE and the writers and what they're doing right now. You see videos, I see videos all the time being posted, house shows, non-televised events of Ronda Rousey working on new moves, doing new things, trying new things. And as we saw at Hell in a Cell, we knew the match at this point was going to be completely different than what we saw between the two of them in the first bout, where Ronda obviously just annihilated her and won the title. And Nick, let's kind of talk a little about. There's a couple other things stories we wanted to talk about. Let's talk a little bit about Ronda Rousey now becoming a seller, because that's kind of the part where she was very Brock Lesnar-like, but the difference is with Ronda, she's there all the time, Nick. So they have to start utilizing her as more of that full-time, active, human pro wrestler that's not unbeatable. She can't be immortal and be the champion and make it believable. Otherwise, all other women are just screwed as it relates to their careers so long as she's there. So we knew that was coming, and we could see the writing on the wall there when they started, having Alexa target her ribs. We knew the match was going to be more of an actual balanced match between the two of them. And now we have to see Ronda start really putting her acting skills to the test. And I think so far she's measuring up. I think she's doing a decent job of it. Where are you standing right now with Ronda Rousey as A, the champion, B, a full-time performer, and the fact that she is definitely having to be played with a little different than they do with someone like a Brock Lesnar, of course, or at least during his major run. They're certainly doing things differently than they did with him. So thumbs up, thumbs down on this? Where are we at?
I got to give it a thumbs up, because she still, in my opinion, is a baby that's being thrown into the deep end of a pool, and she's doing a really good job of finding her footing. She's coming off every week a little bit more and more like a WWE star, and yeah, it just has to be done intelligently. We talked about this. We talked about this as the double-edged sword of Ronda Rousey. You cannot have Ronda Rousey come in and instantly she's just selling for everybody, because then that takes away the mystique of the baddest woman on the planet that is Ronda Rousey. But she also can't be tearing through everybody like she did at SummerSlam. How many weeks can you do that before there's nothing left? Yep. So the tricky part with her is striking that balance. And I think WWE has done that really well. Yes, the logical thing for that match they just had at Hell in a Cell was the injury storyline. You know, she's injured. The ribs are injured. Okay, so she's not Superman. She can't be because she's dealing with an injury. And you can see a bit more of a match. I mean, she did kind of sort of hulk up there and pour it on at the end and just kind of
get a lot of that.
You know?
Yeah.
But again, that's typical babyface versus heel with WWE. Right. So
I guess,
introducing Nia Jax back into the picture, I definitely think is going to help. I think she's someone that can, you know, they maybe can have some multi-woman matches, which takes the focus a little bit off of Ronda Rousey having that singles match. You know, and again, the other thing to consider too is when you have these comparisons with Brock Lesnar, you know, Brock Lesnar being the seasoned vet, you can really tell with Ronda Rousey that they're still scripting her matches move for move, second by second. And that's probably something that she looks at. I mean, she even did an interview where she talked about, you know, the one thing she admires about the veterans in WWE, or at least the people who have been there for a while, the full-time talents, is their ability to maybe call matches on the fly. And I think that's something she really wants to get to. May take her a really long time. It's, you know, I guess we'll see how much time she's going to be around and if she'll really ever be able to get to that point where she's calling a 15 to 20 minute pay-per-view match, or she's working with someone who can do that. But I think that's really where she's at right now. That's separating her from everyone else. Is that, you know, she's still in there. You know, Alexa Bliss had posted pictures of herself training down at the WWE Performance Center last week, and I'm sure that was her and Ronda Rousey just scripting out the match, which I'm not really sure there's anyone else on the roster that's doing that right now. So, and every once in a while, I feel like I can see, you know, where, okay, you know, the timing was a little bit off on this or that. Right. You know, it looked, she's hesitating. She's waiting for this move to happen because she knows it's going to happen because that's how it was rehearsed. So I think maybe, you know, if she's able to get to that point where it's a little less rehearsed, she's well on her way to becoming just phenomenal in there.
In hindsight, Nick, though, knowing what we know now about how much they're going to have Ronda Rousey and how active she's going to be, would you want or prefer, I guess, the Brock Lesnar treatment? If they could have done all of this all over again, do you prefer what we're getting now out of Ronda Rousey, or maybe think more business minded in the sense of what's the better draw? Because there's no doubt that the fans have quite, you know, have kind of gotten numb a little bit to her. You know, I mean, they're seeing so much of her. I feel like the crowd responses are not near what they used to be. So if they could have done this all over again, I mean, they're kind of stuck in the middle now. There's not much they can do, especially with her as champion. But do you think that they could have or should have done it differently?
It's hard to say. I feel like that's just picking it apart a little bit too much because they're doing it well. And, you know, again, if the mindset or if what they knew about Ronda Rousey and her deal going into this whole thing was that, you know, maybe WrestleMania 35 was going to be it for her. That was going to be her last date with the company. Then you've got to use her. Sure. You've got to use her as much as humanly possible. Sense. You know, right. That said, too, she may be enjoying it so much that maybe she's suggesting to WWE, hey, I want to be here every week. You know, I want to be one of these girls that I want to be just like the other girls. You know, I want to be full time. I want to be in there wrestling all the time, you know, and again, you know, that would be up, of course, to WWE to decide whether or not that makes the most business sense, you know. And yes, they're probably over promoting her. They're probably using her too much. You're right. I've already become somewhat, you know, overexposed to her. I don't know if numb, you know, a similar word to numb, and that, you know, when I hear her music hit, when she comes out, it's not this big special attraction anymore. But I think she's still I think what they're doing a really good job of is limiting her in-ring appearances because those still feel pretty special to me. So, you could see her do a promo on Raw, or you could see her in a backstage segment or an in-ring segment where she's talking, and you might say, all right, I've seen this a bunch of times, and that new car smell has worn off in that sense. But her wrestling and her in the ring and the matchups she can still have against talents like the Nia Jaxes and potentially the Mickie James and the Sasha Bankses and the Charlotte Flairs and the Baileys, that's all still relatively new. So, overall, man, I have to say I think they have done this as close to the best that it could be done as they can. Nothing's ever going to be perfect, but I think they're pretty close to it.
All right, so a couple of quick fire questions for you before we wrap up here this edition of The Voice of Wrestling. We now have, what's the guy's name? Leo Rush? With Bobby?
Leo Rush.
Yeah, so, all right, my question to you, though, primarily for this is, hey, I thought it was an entertaining segment, and we've been talking about doing more with Bobby Lashley, a potential manager. It seemed needed, and I think it's going to do some wonders for him in some ways. But I think Kevin Owens maybe takes a little bit of a step back with this feud. I think we both had a lot of high hopes for Kevin because of the way they were utilizing him just a short few weeks ago and some of his great bits and his sketches and everything that he was doing. And now he's right back into a program with somebody that needs as much help really being built up as anybody on the roster, and kind of recycling him and taking him back through the car wash, so to speak, and giving him that makeover because he needed it desperately. And so my question to you, Nick, is well, two questions. One, what do you think of the pairing between Rush and Bobby Lashley, and will it ultimately help Bobby in the areas needed and build him back up potentially? And two, do you think that it's a good idea to maybe it be at the expense of someone like Kevin Owens?
I love the pairing. I think it's great. I think Bobby is one of those guys that probably does need a mouthpiece. Leo Rush is cutting these really interesting sort of heel promos. And I don't know, there's just something about the dichotomy of these two guys, of the massive Bobby. There's something really funny about Leo Rush giving Bobby Lashley workout tips, and advice on how to lift weights. You know what I mean? It's an interesting pairing, and I still get that feeling that it might not necessarily be everything that it appears to be right now. Bobby Lashley's been doing this weird thing. Like, you notice he's doing this weird thing where he does the my man, and he hits the guy really, really hard on his shoulder, and it's a passive aggressive thing that he's doing where maybe at the end of the day he's gonna say, okay, Leo Rush isn't fooling me here, and we're gonna see him destroy Leo Rush in 2 weeks. But I think maybe that was the idea, perhaps, going into it. And then WWE saw, this works. Yeah. There's something to this here. It's worth exploring. So I like it. You could be right, though, that a casualty of this, some collateral damage in this, could be Kevin Owens. We'll see where it goes. I do anticipate Kevin Owens and Leo Rush sort of going toe-to-toe on the microphone. That could be really entertaining. But you're right. If the idea here is to help Kevin Owens. But, Chris, we mentioned this when we saw this feud. This was a dangerous feud to begin with.
Yeah.
Because Kevin Owens is not a guy that needs to be losing right now. Bobby Lashley is a guy that needs all the help he can get. Right. So someone's going to be the victim here. And I don't necessarily know who that's going to be. So it was a dangerous feud, or really a pairing to begin with, pitting Kevin Owens against Bobby Lashley. But I really like what Lashley and Leo Rush are doing right now, and I anticipate more. I look forward to more of that.
On the other side of the ring, we mentioned him, Elias. Nick, you and I are both high on him. The fans eat him up every time he's out in the ring. I'm just curious, quick question, what's his next level? Like, where is that next level for Elias? When might he actually climb to that next level? Where do you think it could be in terms of maybe a title picture, whether it's IC or Universal? Like, where and when is that next level for Elias, who without a question deserves it at some point?
I'm still a firm believer that talents need to be well-rounded in this business. You know, you got to have the mic skills, you got to have the in-ring skills. I think the thing we haven't seen out of Elias yet is the big match. We haven't seen that blow me away in-ring wrestling match. Now, I don't necessarily know if he's capable of doing it. From everything that I've seen, I think the guy can have a great match. I'm waiting for that blow away match at a pay-per-view where when we come on The Voice of Wrestling the next week, we're not talking about how funny the in-ring segment was or the song that he sang or what babyface came out and beat the crap out of him while he was doing his promo. We're talking about the match, and we're talking about, man, he got in the ring and he held his own for 15 to 20 minutes with a Finn Balor or with a Seth Rollins, someone who we know can have a match, is a match of the night caliber talent. I think that's what's next for him. I think the idea of him saying, hey, you know, I'm a talented singer-songwriter and that's what I'm doing here on Raw. But let's not forget, I am also championship level material and I want to get in that ring and I want to prove it. That's what I think the next level is for Elias, is to blow us away with a pay-per-view match.
Yes or no question.
And I know that a lot of people might not agree. I know there's some people out there that say, oh, no, you know, you just have to have the character, and he definitely has that, and he's winning the crowd over just doing that, and he could just do that for the rest of his career. But I think that big match, that match of the night type bout is what's going to take him to the next
and I agree
level.
And I think I really do think he's capable. He's very physical. Yeah. He's just got a lot of the attributes that you need for one of those rough and tumble good matches. But I agree with you. Yes or no question. Would you hate me if I said I'm kind of digging Constable Corbin?
Yes.
Okay, then I won't say that. I do feel that way a little bit.
But I mean, you've already, you insinuated it with the question. So I hate you now.
I didn't say it though. I asked if I said it. So it's really, you're not following the rules, Nick.
You got rid of the beard. You like Constable Corbin.
Moving on though.
We start talking about Jinder Mahal now.
I also saw
really upset. You can really ruin my day.
I also saw something that I really haven't seen in somebody else, and I think the sky is the limit for a guy. Drew McIntyre. I think his match. Who was it? It was Rollins, right? His match was.
You're talking about on Raw.
I mean
this
Ambrose.
week?
Ambrose, yeah.
Dean Ambrose on Raw this week. Well, he had a back-to-back.
That
nights.
Yeah, that match with Ambrose. I mean, at the end of it, I just saw myself looking like this guy has the look. I mean, like big time look. Like I could ultimately see him having a massive, massive career, and I really hadn't seen that up until this point. I mean, I know he's got talent, but I mean, this guy could go far. I really, really think if he can stay healthy and they give him the opportunities, which I think right now he's really getting I think him, Dolph, Braun, in a lot of ways are getting big rubs from one another right now with this storyline. I really do. I think the tag team titles was a good starting point. I think where they're going with these guys have been good. Agree or disagree? How far can Drew McIntyre go in your mind?
All the way to the top.
Yeah.
I mean, there's really nothing right now that this guy doesn't have. And I think what's great. See, and I think even comparing him to a guy like Elias, we saw back-to-back in-ring performances from Drew McIntyre this weekend that really just, I think the 1-2 punch of both. I mean, the tag team match was just phenomenal at Hell in a Cell. Then he comes out and he does it the next night in a singles capacity. It's just a 1-2 punch that says, man, it reminds you this guy is here and who he is. I think if Elias has that, if he's able to give you that, imagine Elias having one hell of a pay-per-view match on a Sunday night and then on Monday night blowing you away with a hilarious song. That's That's kind of what I think we're seeing in Drew McIntyre right now. The guy is absolutely massive. He has a tremendous look.
Yeah.
He's unique on the mic. I think he's got great mic skills, a great presence, and then he just knocked it out with 2 great matches on Sunday and Monday. So absolute sky is the limit for this guy. Question to you: who becomes WWE Universal Champion first? Is it Drew McIntyre or is it Elias?
Dolph Ziggler. I mean, no.
Or is it Constable Corbin?
That's tough. I'm going to say Drew McIntyre. I'm not sure Elias ever becomes Universal or a World Heavyweight Champion. Probably not Universal. Maybe he can move over to SmackDown next year.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, look,
you don't ever see a top title, a Universal title run on Raw for Elias.
I want it. I don't. I don't know that his time in the sun comes anytime real soon because of the people that I think that WWE puts ahead of him. I think
right.
So, and I think Drew McIntyre is one of those guys, and I think Drew would win it. And I think I would see Elias moving over to SmackDown to kind of refreshen his active wrestling career before I see him getting an opportunity on the Raw side. Final question, though, kind of step out of a WWE ring, Nick. There's some reports of officials on both sides of WWE. Well, I guess it's not really stepping out of a WWE ring completely, but WWE officials may be meeting with Impact Wrestling's officials over what's the story, what's the latest, and what do you expect to maybe come out of it?
The latest as of the airing of this show, according to Mike Johnson of PWInsider.com, WWE officials did meet with Impact officials. It was Ed Nordum, who is the president over at Anthem Sports and Entertainment. For those of you unaware, Anthem Sports and Entertainment is the parent company of Impact Wrestling. So Ed Nordum, along with Scott D'Amore, who is also an Impact Wrestling official, they traveled over to Stamford, Connecticut to meet with WWE officials, including Triple H, at WWE headquarters last week. And as of now, what we know is that this was sort of just a way to get both sides in one room, to get sort of Impact Wrestling officials and WWE officials there, sitting in a room together, kind of talking out what's going on, kind of basically introducing each other's companies, so to speak. They have done business in the past. WWE licensed a lot of that old TNA Broken Universe footage that we saw on the WWE Network for the Hardy Boys special that aired not too long ago. So WWE has worked with Anthem. Since Anthem came in and took over Impact Wrestling, we've seen WWE working with them a little bit more in terms of licensing some of the content. So the preliminary idea here, or the speculation, is that they were meeting because both sides are interested in a potential content share, maybe WWE licensing more of the TNA library for use on the WWE network. For anybody who is speculating or thinking that this was possibly a meeting about Impact Wrestling selling to WWE or WWE buying Impact Wrestling, that does not appear to be the case right now. This was sort of a preliminary sit down to talk, let the two sides get comfortable with each other and say, hey, maybe what can we do to help? What do we want from the other side? And at this point, that could be something along the lines of content sharing or even potentially talent exchanges. We see Impact Wrestling does that with other promotions all the time when they're doing these talent exchanges. Maybe that could be something that they're trying to pursue with WWE as well.
Very nice. We will continue to update you on that story as it progresses, and then more details kind of come out of it if it does. So yeah, that's it for this week on The Voice of Wrestling. A lot covered, a ton going on. We've got some big events coming up in the month of, later this month, I guess there's, and then next month, some big stuff taking place. So we've got plenty to run down, and we've got some cool things happening here at The Voice of Wrestling that we'll keep you updated with. However, that's going to do it for us this week. That is Nick Paglino. I am Chris Cash. This has been The Voice of Wrestling, and we'll see you next week.